Hi, I'm Stephen Berkeley, Director of Global Business at Flint Rock Consulting. For over 25 years, I've been working with values and how they influence our lives. In this Our Insight series on working with values, I bring you conversations on values with thought leaders from around the world. Let's dive in for our conversation. Welcome to another interview in our series of Working with Values, and it gives me a great pleasure to welcome Geoff Marlow onto the interview series. Thanks for coming and joining us, Geoff.
Thanks very much for inviting me, Stephen. It's great to have a conversation with you about this important topic.
Yeah, great. And now, why is Geoff here? And Geoff and I have known each other for about 15 or so years. And I've always found the conversations have been really deep and stretching for me. And we've had many conversations about values over the years. And so it just seemed a natural fit for you to come and join us and really share your insights and your take on values. And so that's going to be my first question to you. Just the run-of-the-mill question, but it's really interesting to hear everybody's take on this. What are values?
I think values are the foundation on which we build virtues. So virtues are character traits that are things that we bring into our actions and interactions with others, and which those others would perhaps value in us. So I would say that the definition of values is less important than the manifestation of values as virtues. There's a little thing from Angela Duckworth, who wrote the book Grit. She's a professor at University of Pennsylvania, and she says that you can value kindness but not actually be a kind person, not actually manifest kindness in your actions and interactions. And so there's a difference between having a value of kindness and having a virtue or character trait of kindness that others would say, oh yeah, Stephen, I like Stephen, he's very kind. It would be manifest in your actions and interactions. So that would be the distinction I would make between values and virtues.
Yeah, great. And I think that's really useful for people when it comes to watching and saying how are values manifesting. And it's one thing for an organization to be saying that these are our values, and it's how it manifests. I'd really love to know what's been your journey into the realm of values. What got you interested in this and the power of it within organizations?
Yeah, well, I guess there's two dimensions to that. I mean, one is the personal dimension, which is understanding values in my own life and in others' lives. I mean, about I think 25, it's probably closer to 30 years ago now. I was involved in a workshop session at a place in India, a place called the Academy for the Better World. You and I have actually had conversations there. And this was about discovering your values. And it was a little workshop session where we were guided to explore our own values, to be clearer about what things really were working well for us when we were flourishing, that kept us going when we were going through difficulties, that are the kind of things that you would defend even if it risked upsetting people that you would rather not upset. So those kind of things. And I found it very illuminating, because it made me realize that there were certain values that I had that I wasn't really expressing. They weren't really brought into my actions and interactions. So that made me very curious about the power of values, because I could see that by focusing on and specifically paying attention to cultivating things that were valuable to me, in me, that it would enable me to feel like I was more valuable to myself and to others. And I think it's also that by doing that, you start to flourish. You get this sort of feeling of being alive, really. I mean, it's what living your values is what makes you feel really alive and really authentic. So that was the personal dimension. The other dimension, as you mentioned, is the organizational dimension. And just about every organization has its list of 5 allegedly shared values or core values. And yet the stories are legion of organizations that publish their values and then behave in ways that are not consistent with those values. And so on the one hand, we've got this recognition that on a personal level, values are super deep and important. On the other hand, there's a lot of, how would I say, there's a lot of skepticism, let's say, about values in organizations, because it's easy to espouse them. And it's back to the Duckworth distinction, you know, that I mentioned earlier, that you can espouse certain values and then behave in different ways. So unless they're in your character, and organizations have a character as well as individuals have a character. So it's those 2 dimensions, and seeing a lot of organizations where I was involved in trying to help them to create cultures of innovation, agility, adaptiveness, which is the professional work that I've been doing for 35 years, and seeing that they might have a list of values. And then because they've got a list of values, they would senior people would say, well, you know, we've sorted our culture out. You know, we did the offsite. We've got the list of values. That's what we are. And that would be it. There would be no more effort made to actually transform the culture because we've got the list, we've done the job. So these are the 2 kind of aspects that I think that have really been front and center for me around values. Personally, super important, really would encourage anybody and everybody to do that inner reflection and that cultivation work, because it makes you feel alive and it enables you to bring your, if you want to say, God-given talents into the world. But at the corporate level, there's a lot of confusion and a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of you know, kind of accepting the headline, but the real reality is actually different from the headline.
So, great. So what is the interplay then between personal values and organizational values? And I heard you say there, you know, people say there's shared values, but you're skeptical about that, I sense. So what is the play? How do organizations work with values? And tell me a little bit more behind your thoughts around shared values.
Yeah. So I think what organizations are really looking for when they start to talk about values is behaviors that they want to have in the organization because they think that they will be useful to the organization. I mean, that's maybe the mercenary framing. You know, a less mercenary framing would be that they want to stand for something in the world and therefore to cultivate the kind of culture where the organization behaves in the world in ways that are valuable to society, and that therefore the society continues to give them a mandate and a permission, a license to operate, if you like. And so that's why I think organizations talk about values and think about values. But if you think about what an organization's culture is, I mean, as an individual working in an organization, you experience the culture in a kind of embodied way. It's not just a conceptual idea that is espoused by certain people and, you know, maybe on a plexiglass plaque in the front of the building.
The way we do things around here.
Yeah, it's that experience of the way we do things around here. And within that, there is a sort of sense of we. So there's a kind of belonging and being part of something. And that can be at the, you know, me and one other colleague, or it can be me and a few colleagues working together, or a department, or at the whole organization level, there's a sense of we. And of course, round here also depends on the we. So the way we do things around here is multidimensional, it's complex, and it's fluid. So in terms of personal values, well, people would like to, or people feel more, they feel like they're more flourishing, they feel more happy, fulfilled and contented when they are able to bring their values into their actions and interactions within their organizations. And so where I think organizations do a good job with values, it's they create conditions that allow people to bring their, and you know, these words are tending to be a little bit devalued these days, but they bring their authentic selves to the work that they do so that they can flourish within the workplace. And there's quite solid sort of academic research around human psychology related to this, particularly from self-determination theory. That is about how you create the conditions and what those conditions need to do for individuals so they can manifest their values.
So, in terms of organisations working, do you feel like understanding self-determination theory is an important way for them to work with the values of people and honour the values of the people that work within their organisations or with them and their stakeholders?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's one of the dimensions that is very fruitful to explore, because it's quite simple. It basically says there are three elements. They use the term nutriments, which are important for individuals to feel that they're flourishing in the workplace, but not just flourishing, it's the root of intrinsic motivation. So organizations say that they kind of want people to bring their whole selves to work. They want to be motivated, they want to be energized and do things because they're passionate about them, as opposed to doing it just because they get a paycheck. Obviously the paycheck is important, but again, research shows that above a certain level of pay, that stops being the motivator. It starts to be more about, a sense of fulfillment and a sense that there's something meaningful in the work that you're doing.
So what role do shared values have? I mean, if what you're saying is that you want to create an environment where people flourish and you're providing opportunities for them to bring their full authentic self into the workplace, and your focus is on that, then what role does shared values have? And what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I just really have a big problem with the term shared values. I think that if you look at so there's some research done by University of Zurich, I think it was in 2019, and they came up with what they regarded as a set of universal human values that exist across all cultures, and there were 19 of them, right? So if you kind of start with the premise that there are 19 core values, if you want to call that humans share across the planet, and then your organization says, well, we have 5 values that we think are the shared values of our organization. Just simply doing the mathematics and working out, okay, if there are 19 randomly distributed values across the human population, how many people would you have to, say, interview in order to recruit one person that had the same 5 values as you've got on your list? And it turns out to be 11,600 people. So, it kind of starts to look a little bit difficult to find people who are people with the same 5 out of 19. One of my colleagues discovered an organization that was claiming that they had a list of 200 values. Well, if you do the maths on that, picking the same 5 out of 200, you'd need to interview more people than have ever existed in the history of the planet to actually find one statistically likely to have the same 5 values that you've got on your list. But again, what I think organizations are trying to do when they talk about shared values is they're trying to say there needs to be something that causes us to cohere as an organization, where people are behaving in ways that are the ways that we would like to behave in the world, so that we're actually, as an organization, adding value to the world in an appropriate way, in a way that we feel good about. And we want people who feel inspired and energized and enthused to be part of that. I think the problem is, once you write down your list of 5 values, the people who, and what I've seen in practice is the people who least embody the values that you're trying to get to manifest in the culture, and that therefore you've come up with your list, the people who least embody those values are the ones who are most likely to look at the list and go, yeah, I do that. Yeah, I do that. Yeah. No, those look fine to me. Yeah, no problem. And that's it. There's no more change that happens as a consequence of having published the 5 values. And, someone recently said, and I thought it was an interesting observation, that once you write your organization's values down, you've lost them. And I think it's because of that mechanism. And yet, for 40 years, organizations have so much believed that they need to have their values and need to list them and need to write them down, that it's almost a heresy to say in an organization that actually writing down your values is really missing the point. It's creating the conditions in which the values that you would like to have manifest, because that's the way we do things around here. And again, there are ways of influencing that, but you know, the role of talking about values has a very small impact on the way we do things around here compared to the combination of various factors that do have an impact.
Okay. What you're saying is that creating the conditions for people to live and express their values should be forefront on leaders' minds. But how do they go about creating those conditions? It appears to me as though that by having the focus of values, it gives organisations something to focus on, or a label. If there's not that label, what label should they use?
Yeah. Well, I think a label has two functions, doesn't it? One is it attracts attention to the idea that there's something important here. And the other thing is a label is something that gets stuck on the outside of a package, but what you're really interested in is what's inside the package. And I think that's where the confusion and the risk exists around specifically focusing on values, as opposed to understanding what are the things that influence people's perception of the way we do things around here, and where does talking about values fit within that set of things that influence people's perception of the way we do things around here. Because it's not one-to-one. It's not just that you talk about the values and then people behave in a way that's consistent with the values. People are picking up a whole set of signals. From a colleague of mine did some research, again, going back 25, 30 years when she was at MIT Sloan School. She and a couple of colleagues, they published a book called Intentional Revolutions, where they identified 7 channels through which people pick up the signals that they then use to infer the way we do things around here. And you can argue that expressing values, talking about values, is a part of one of those 7 channels, but you've still got the other 6, and you've still got the other parts of the one channel that talking about values might fit into.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you suggest that talking about values is just one component of the piece. So if I'm a leader and of an organisation, and I'm wanting to create an environment where people flourish, what are the things that they need to do? What types of conversations do they need to be having? What types of questions do they need to be asking?
Yeah. I mean, this sort of moves us into territory where there's another challenging thing, if you like, which is the use of the term leader, because we tend to think of senior people as, there's a couple of labels that we use for senior people in organizations. One is leaders and another is decision makers. And both of them become problematic in a world where what you want is innovation, agility, and adaptiveness, because innovation often doesn't come from the top. You know, the conditions that are created by people who are influential at the top of the organization have a great deal to do with whether you get innovation, agility, adaptiveness. But the ideas almost always come from in the body of the organization or potentially outside the organization. And so it's the role of senior people is more about creating the conditions for the emergence of what you want than it is that they, you know, stride out in front and champion the direction and everything, or that they effectively just make the decisions. And I mean, they're hard habits to break because they've been part of the organizational discourse for certainly senior executives being decision makers has been a central part of the organizational discourse for over 100 years, since Taylor published his book Scientific Management in 1911. And the whole leadership thing, a leader sort of, you know, creating a vision and enrolling people and getting people on board and inspiring them and enthusing them to take action, has been a very strong theme within organizations for maybe 30 to 40 years. So recognizing that you've got all of that embodied, embedded, habitual stuff in place, and therefore that creates all sorts of expectations, not just of people within the organization as to what senior people do, but also of the senior people themselves as to what their role is. And this is where we kind of run into some challenges, and this is why I think this work by my colleague Joan Lancourt at MIT Sloan all those years ago is really so relevant today still. And it was one of those things that wasn't really picked up on. What you find in organizational research and scholarship is that the ideas that get picked up on tend to be the ideas that either sound like they're a simple silver bullet solution. Let's sprinkle some psychological safety on our organization or something like that, and kind of it'll all will be well. Or they're things that big consulting firms can latch onto and then sell very large assignments that mobilize lots of their junior people. The ideas that actually help people think at a deeper, more systemic level about transformation and about how to change the culture in organizations tend not to get taken up, because they're not simple silver bullets, and they're not something that can be brought into organizations by lots of junior consultants. So kind of in this, that's the challenge that we face, is that we're in the middle of all that mix.
Okay, so I'm an average punter, and I may be a leader, I may not be a leader, but I'm really interested in the people around me flourishing. So what do I need to be mindful of? And what questions can I ask that gets this conversation going? Because you said that, conversations around values is only a small part, and then we're talking about the way we do things around here. But I'm an average punter, and I'm really interested in making a difference with my team or whoever I'm working with. What are the questions I can ask myself, and what are the conditions I need to create?
Well, I mean, again, I come back to the 7, and I mean, I'll just quickly list the 7 things that drive people's perceptions of the way we do things around here. So, I mean, I'll do them in order, and we can just sort of unpack them if you like. So, persuasive communication. So this is where people put messages, powerful messages, into the organization. It's often something senior people do. But the point of them, the reason it's called persuasive communication, is because people have a degree of choice as to whether they buy into what's being said or not. So, they'll have conversations around the coffee cooler, around the coffee machine or the water cooler. So persuasive communication is the first one. Participation is the second one. How much do they get involved in developing the future of the organization versus just being told what to do? Third one is role modeling. Who are the role models? Who are the people whose behaviors seem to be the behaviors to emulate in the organization? Fourth one is expectancy. That's the most subtle of the 7. It's where if I interact with you with the belief that you're competent and well-intentioned, you'll probably live up to my expectation. If I look at you as though you're, less competent, less well-intentioned, mad or bad or both, then you're likely to live down to those expectations. So it's the Pygmalion effect. That's the expectancy. And then the last 3 are the ones organizations typically reach for, which are structural rearrangement. So changing the organogram, moving the boxes on the org chart, new processes, procedures, that kind of thing. Extrinsic rewards, so bonuses, pay, rations, how you kind of get rewarded extrinsically. And the final one is coercion, which is effectively you have to do this even though you don't want to. The only option you have if you want to not do this is you have to leave the field in which the coercive force is being applied. So all those 7 are always operating in organizations all the time, and different people pick up on different combinations of the 7. So to your specific question about what questions should you be asking, you should be asking questions to try and understand what are the signals that different people are picking up that broadly fit into those 7 categories. And invariably you find that they're getting misaligned messages, and which ones are they listening to? Because that will dictate their understanding of the way we do things around here, and that's why they will behave in the way that they do. And that will either make it possible or impossible for them to bring their personal values into the organizational setting.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that by asking questions around these 7 areas, you're identifying what are those things that will actually limit people from expressing their values, and that it's important to be able to identify that.
Yeah, and it's not just inhibit. I mean, it's also enable. There may be
Okay.
things that are enabling people to do that, but often there are, like I say, conflicting messages. So, a typical example that you find time and again in organisations is the extrinsic rewards are very much driven on an individualistic basis. So each person has certain metrics that they're measured on, and their rewards are associated with those metrics. The persuasive communication, which was the first of the 7 channels of influence, somebody senior says, we really have to be collaborative and we really need teamwork around here. So you've got one message saying it's really about what we do together, and you've got another message saying what really matters is what you do as an individual. So one of the dysfunctional behaviors you get as a consequence of that is an individual hears, okay, well, we have to appear to be team orientated and appear to be collaborative, but what really matters in terms of your pay is what you do individually. So there's a bit of theatre goes on. So people perform as though they're being collaborative, whilst actually their main driver is to make sure they hit their numbers, because that's the thing that dictates their extrinsic rewards. So it's looking for that kind of stuff that you start to understand, oh, that's why the culture, the way we do things around here. Former colleague of mine used to describe this as, if you want to understand the unwritten rules in the organisation, what you do is you ask an individual, what is the advice that you would give a close friend on how to survive and thrive in this part of the organisation? And there you get a kind of a human interpretation of the meaning of the various signals people are picking up through those 7 channels. And I'm not saying like the 7 channels is the perfect way of expressing those things, but it is a really good starting point to reflect on what are the signals people are picking up and why that might therefore result in the behavior that you want or not result in the behavior you want. And I think the values piece comes in when what you want is people to be creative and to co-create new value in new ways, another way of saying innovation, agility, adaptiveness. You need to be able to, what those 7 channels need to be doing is giving people the understanding that the way we do things around here allows me to bring my own values into what I do and how I work with others.
So the question then becomes, what is it in a way that we do things around here that either enhances or inhibits my ability to express my values? And you're, certainly. Yeah. And you're asking people to be curious about that, not in a critical way, but these things happen. And so we're trying to develop an antenna here. And an eye for looking out for those things that inhibit or enhance, and they're the signals.
Yeah. I mean, if your purpose is specifically to do what you just articulated, which is enable people to bring their values so that they flourish, then that's exactly what you do. But organizations don't just want to do that. Organizations don't just want to create conditions in which people flourish. They also need to achieve something in the world collectively. Yeah. So that's why I always focus on, what the objective is the way we do things around here. How do we create value? Because to be able to continue to do that in a world that is increasingly uncertain and unpredictable, you need to get people collectively within the organization to be continually making sense of what the organization is, how they might add value, who they might add value for, then making decisions about what we do and what we don't do, and then taking action based on the sense making and the decision making that you've just done. And those 3 steps, or those 3 elements of sense making, decision making, and action taking, need to be tightly coupled together so that they feed each other, and they need to be iterated rapidly, and they need to be deeply embedded and widely distributed throughout the organization. And if you can achieve that, then you have that kind of culture. In short, I refer to it as a future fit culture, because if the future is more uncertain and unpredictable, then to be fit for that future, you need to get those 3 elements working. And the best sense making will happen when people are able to bring their whole self to the situation, and that's then also the condition that also creates the conditions for their values to be manifest and to be brought into play within the organizational context.
how can I improve my sense-making capabilities? So you've given a great frame for me to be more curious about the way we do things around here. How can what can I do to get better at sense making? What do I need to be on the watch for? What questions do I need to be asking myself and about what I see around me from a cultural perspective?
Yeah, I think that there's a core understanding around sense making that is super important, and that is that none of us ever sees the whole picture. It doesn't matter how good I get at sense making, I will never see the whole picture. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't aspire to see more, and I don't aspire to get clearer about what I authentically see. And I mean, again, this is where I think values comes in quite centrally. Is if I'm living my values more consistently, then what I see will be more genuinely what I see through my own eyes. And what I mean by that is that what happens to us as we develop as individuals, you know, our parental conditioning, our family conditioning, school, with friends, society, we pick up all sorts of messages from outside that tell us the way to behave. And sometimes we end up internalizing influences from outside ourselves that lead us away from our own values. So we kind of have learnt to behave in certain ways because you're supposed to behave that way, or because people want you to behave that way or reward you for behaving that way, and they may not be consistent with your own genuine values. But when you do that, when you get sort of, if you like, distorted in that way, you get pulled off track, you get taken off your center, you become out of balance, then you're not able to sense make effectively. And so two other things, I suppose there's two dimensions to how you improve your sense making. One is you do more inner work to reflect and observe, when do you get out of kilter, when are you off center, when are you influenced by things that were at one point external influences, but you've internalized them so that they feel like they're part of you, but they're not really part of you. And so that's why the inner work is important. That's one element of it. The other element of it is, as you interact with others around you and you're curious about what they see that you don't, because if you really get and embody the understanding that none of us ever sees the whole picture, then you begin to realize that if somebody else is seeing something different from you, it doesn't mean that they're mad or bad or both, or incompetent or unreasonable. What it means is they're just seeing some other aspect that you're not seeing. So there's some truth value in their perspective that isn't yet in yours. And if you've got that framing, you become really curious about what they're seeing that you're not seeing. And you know that I like to wave this thing around. You know, so one person.
I was waiting for it, Geoff. I was waiting for it.
Well, you know, I've been quite good. It's been, I don't know, half an hour or so before. I didn't fetch it out within the first 5 minutes. But, you know, one person's looking at this and seeing a circle. You know, another person's looking at it and seeing a triangle. And another person's looking at it and they're seeing a square. And if we get fixated on our particular perspective and take it to be the whole of the whole picture, then you get people saying, well, you know, you're saying it's a square, but I can see it's a circle, and I know we can't both be right, and I know I am, so you must be wrong. And so we then get into this debate, which is the literal meaning of the word debate is from débattre, a French word, which means to beat down your opponent. Or you would get into discussion, and that has the same root as concussion and percussion, and it literally means to smash to pieces your opponent's argument. Or your third option is dialogue, and dialogue is where you come together in a way where by expressing and exploring each other's perspectives, both of the parties, or if it's more than two collectively, we get more insight into the overall bigger picture. But no one of us ever gets as much insight as all of us working together do. And so that's why there's that saying that, you know, none of us is as smart as all of us. So the sense making is, yes, I can get better at individual sense making by understanding and cultivating my values, bringing them as virtues, so I genuinely see through my own true eyes. But we can also improve sense making by the way in which we act and interact with others. And that becomes increasingly important as complexity goes up, So the only way to manage complexity is for us collectively to sense make, decision make, and action take. And that's why, back to the comment I made earlier, senior people who think their job is decision making inhibit the capacity for the organization to develop this kind of culture. They have to, instead of saying my job is to make the decisions, they have to start thinking my job is to make sure that good decisions get made and implemented. And that means creating the conditions for sense making, decision making, and action taking to come alive.
It's interesting. Our first guest on this Working with Value series, Neil Hawkes, also said the same thing and emphasised that this requires inner work, and that's the starting point. And the same question I asked him, and I'll ask you as well, is that how do we encourage that? Okay, so here I am, I'm a punter and I'm trying to improve how things work within my team, and I'm working on myself. And we realize that that's important for how we see things. How do I encourage that without proselytizing with my team? How do we create a culture where it's okay and it's important for us to know what's going on inside? What are the key tips? And it's coming back to this whole self-determination theory that you talked about at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, it comes back more directly to those 7 channels that I mentioned, because the specific answer is the way we influence the culture around us is largely by our role modeling and our expectancy, which were channels 3 and 4. The proselytizing bit fits into the persuasive communication, but you know there's a fine line between espousing something and saying this would be great, but if you're not embodying it, actions speak louder than words. So there's an important role for communicating in a verbal way and saying, look, this is what I think we should be doing. Or when someone's passionate and you can feel that the passion is coming from somewhere deep inside them, it's quite inspiring. So persuasive communication matters. And of course, participation. It's no good saying we want to have this kind of culture, but then reserving the right to make all the decisions and punishing people when they make mistakes. And so those first 4 of the 7 become much more important than the last 3, the structural rearrangement, the extrinsic rewards, and coercion that organizations have traditionally reached for in the past. So being mindful of how I'm influencing because of the way I embody and express and enact through those 7 channels is important at an individual level, but also thinking about how it works through an organization system and how systemically, who are the key influencers within the culture who, because of their behavior, send the signals through those channels that cause the most impact on others in the way they infer the way we do things around here. So for me, that's the way where I would start, is understand those 7 channels and understand how you're currently influencing through those. And then the objective, if you like, would be to say, if I think self-determination theory is important, then what I'm looking to do is to create the conditions for the 3 elements of that, which are autonomy, competence, and relatedness.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, but I think it's very powerful stuff, Geoff, and it gives a frame for people as it does come back to me and how I'm working on myself and how I see the world. But as you said, it's not about proselytizing, it's about role modeling. And I think it would be great, for us to work together and create some questions around those 7 that would help people explore those and understand the impact of them. This has been a really fabulous conversation, and there's lots of depth for us to even unpack for days, I think. And what's one final piece of advice you would leave people with working with values for themselves and for their organizations?
Well, the central thing that I come back to time and again is the thing that I waved in front of you. So it's really the one thing, it's got 2 aspects to it, right? The one thing is get really, really clear about what you really genuinely see. And the other is be really, really curious about what others see and what the truth value is in what they see. Don't be so quick to dismiss other people's perspectives. And if I wanted to summarize that into a kind of little aphorism, it would be that it's amazing what we can achieve collectively when we maintain the awareness that the other people that we're working with are competent and well-intentioned, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And it's the last bit that's most difficult, because if people behave in ways that we don't want them to behave, it's very difficult not to label them as incompetent or unreasonable. So it does take inner work to be able to get to the place where you've built up the muscles to be able to see the competence and the positive intentions in others, even if it would be so much easier to see the incompetence and the bad intentions of others, because there may be, you know, there are 9 points of those things that we could pick up on, and only 1 point that is the positive aspect of those that we could pick up on. And so cultivating that, and this is the expectancy dimension, right? It's focusing on what you see that is good in the other person, that they can build on and you can build on in the relationship, that helps them to flourish, and it also helps you to be more effective.
Thank you. I think it's great advice, and I have one more question for you. And you've been working in complex situations for many years, and some of them have obviously been quite tough, and challenging. What keeps you inspired? What gives you that sense of giving you that way of looking at the world that you have?
Yeah. It's amazing. Whenever you ask a question, whenever anyone asks a question like that, there's one scene that comes back into my mind, and it was a piece of work I did. It was a relatively small piece of work, but it was so instrumental in my career. And I'd already kind of been doing culture change work for maybe 10 years or so when I had this experience. And it was with a Swedish company, and they'd ground to a halt. They were a tech startup, and they'd grown to a certain size. They got a new CEO, and the new CEO had come in and said, up until now, we've been a technology-driven company. Now we're going to be a market-driven company. And it caused the organization to grind to a halt, because the technology people now felt that they'd been displaced from driving the organization forward, which is what they'd been doing for the whole of its history. And the marketing people now felt great, at last we're being respected and we're in charge, but they kind of didn't know what to do because they didn't understand the technology. So the whole thing kind of ground to a halt. Anyway, long story short, little piece of work with these guys, came to the conclusion, that the circle was, we need to drive the technology, and the triangle was, we, need to understand the market, what the market demand is. And in that conversation, recognizing there was truth value in both sides of those perspectives, what emerged was, actually, we don't need to be market driven. We need to drive the market. Because once you reframe be market driven to drive the market, you get rid of this conflict of the two perspectives of what does be market driven mean. And you realize that to drive the market, the technology and the marketing people have to work together in a way where they can demonstrate the power of the technology to potential customers, and then see where the pull is. And that meant producing some technology demonstrators and The thing that really inspired me about that was that the culture in that organization changed literally overnight. And up to that point, I had believed, like most people do, or did, and probably still do, culture change is inherently long, difficult, challenging, because you've got embedded, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. But when people have an aha moment and they suddenly see why it is that they're like this, and they could actually be like this, it is amazing to see the collective human energy that gets released. And literally for me, it was like I was left in their wake. They were off and running, and I was kind of like, what had happened? And the sponsoring executive, the CEO, had come in. He said to me, what did you do? And I said, I wish I knew, and it was actually an understanding what had gone on, that I could see, if you can get people to perceive the value in the perspectives of others who they're otherwise in conflict with, the amount of human energy, innovation, agility, inspiration, enthusiasm that gets unleashed individually and collectively is just so inspiring. And I can literally remember walking away from that piece of work thinking, if you could bottle this experience and sell it to people, you would destroy the market for illegal drugs, because this is the biggest high I think I'd ever experienced, and still is the biggest high I've ever experienced in my life, is to see people who have the capacity to do great stuff unable to do it because of some perception they've got that puts them in conflict with each other, and to clear that away, for them to suddenly see that they're actually aligned, it is just so powerful and empowering. So that's what keeps me going. I always have the belief that at some point the potential will be that gets unlocked, and whether it's between a couple of people or between two teams or around a whole organization, that's the thing that keeps me doing what I do.
Thanks, Geoff. And I get, for me, what my takeaway from this is that working with values is about valuing others' perspectives. And you bring it back down to those three words: valuing others' perspectives is where the work is.
Well, valuing all perspectives, because there's your own as well. It's possible to value others' perspectives by devaluing your own. And actually, you need to do both. You need to be very good at seeing with your own eyes, but also encouraging others to see with their own eyes and to share what they're seeing and what you're seeing.
Great, thank you. And I think that you underlined that earlier in talking about the importance of dialogue, and it appears from our conversation today that ability for people who are trying to bring about change is that capability to have dialogue, honest dialogue, to help people reveal how they see the situation, how we see it, and how we can bring those two things together. So yes. Thanks, Geoff. It's been an absolute delight having you here, and thank you for accepting the challenge to have this conversation today. And I look forward to having many conversations in the future around working with values.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for inviting me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Owl Insights, Working with Values. Please do subscribe to our Owl newsletter and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. More information about today's speaker can be found in the show notes.